Welcome all. We are thrilled to have you here virtually at the University of Chicago. And welcome to Enduring Excellence, a conversation series from the University of Chicago Graham School, exploring how remarkable individuals sustain purpose, vitality, and impact across a lifetime. My name is Seth Green, and an afternoon like this one, I have the glory of saying I'm the dean here at the University of Chicago Graham School. And we are the home of lifelong learning and leadership. And as people live longer and the pace of change accelerates, one of the most important questions we face is not simply how to succeed once, but how to evolve, grow, and remain purposeful across the many chapters of a life and career. Few scholars in the world have thought more deeply about that challenge than our guest today, Herminia Ibarra. Herminia is the Charles Handy Professor of Organizational Behavior at London Business School and one of the world's leading authorities on leadership development and career reinvention. Her research has helped reshape how we think about professional identity, transitions, and the courage required to step into new possibilities. Her books, including Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader, and Working Identity, have guided leaders around the world who are navigating moments of change and asking not only what should I do next, but who do I want to become next? That question sits at the very heart of this Enduring Excellence series because enduring excellence is rarely about staying the same. More often, it is about the willingness to experiment, to adapt, and to grow into new identities as the world around us also evolves. Herminia's work reminds us that reinvention is not a detour from leadership, it is often the very path to it. We are especially grateful that she is joining us today to share insights from decades of research and observation about how people navigate transitions, develop authentic leadership, and continue contributing meaningfully over the long arc of a life. And as always, for these Enduring Excellence conversations, I'm absolutely delighted that this conversation will be guided by someone who has also spent decades engaging with extraordinary leaders, our moderator and a veteran business journalist, including decades as an anchor at CNBC, Tyler Matheson. And with that, Herminia and Tyler, I will turn it over to both of you.
Seth, thank you so much. And Herminia, welcome. It's great to have you with us today for Enduring Excellence. Seth really gave a very complete full list of your written work and your career arc. But I would just like to hit on a couple of the things that are really central to, I think, who you are through my reading of your work. And that is that we don't think our way into new identities. We act our way into them, which means that, by the way, all those leadership weekends that you've spent and chin stroking and temple massaging, well, maybe they weren't as valuable as actually experimenting and trying different things by way of becoming a better, fuller leader, or by way of engineering the kind of career transition that the Graham School is so centrally about. You may find that experimenting with new selves is really the way to go here, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Her research has really challenged the conventional wisdom that authenticity, career transitions, and what it takes to actually become a leader are not maybe what we think they are. In fact, I think she's turned a lot of the scholarship inside out or on its head and told us, in effect, you've been doing this backwards. And that's one of the reasons why her books are really required reading at so many business schools around the world, and if not just in business schools, out in the leadership environment. Professor Ibarra, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Tyler. I'm very pleased to be here.
Let's start at the beginning and give people a sense of a little bit of a sense of who you are and how you came to where you are. You were born in Cuba and emigrated from there. What was your family life like? What were the values that your parents instilled in you? And when did you emigrate? And where did you land? And how was the transition?
Okay, we go way back. Right, so I was 7 when we immigrated to the United States, to Miami, where all my family still lives, where I grew up. And, my parents were your typical immigrants, education first. You're grounded unless you keep up that, 3.9 to 4.0 grade point average. But they, like most immigrant families, put a huge value on education. I was the firstborn, so I had to absolutely get that right. And it worked well because I was an introverted, nerdy kid who liked to study and decided that probably academia was a good place to be for the entirety of my life, which is what ended up happening.
Yeah, you went to the University of Miami undergraduate and then went to Yale to get a couple of higher degrees and then landed at Harvard. And I guess I'm curious as to when you knew and how you knew that the
Yeah.
academic life was right for you. And here you are, the sort of icon of experimentation. Did you ever try anything else? Did you ever experiment with
No,
anything else?
that's always my running joke. You know, we as academics, we always study the things that we don't want to do or that we don't do. But that is an irony. I've never made a career change. I mean, I've made big shifts and we can talk about them, but I've never contemplated doing anything else but being an academic. Now, you know, it's funny when I was younger, especially my students would say stuff to me like, don't you really want to roll up your sleeves and run something? And I'd feel a little sheepish about it. Now they all want my job, you know, because in academia, especially if you do get tenure and you're perched at a great place with resources, it's a job that allows, if you like to write and research, which is my love. And I've met people who were great teachers and just didn't have that love for sitting alone forever in front of a computer and writing. If you have that love, and that is fundamentally what I most like to do, it's the ideal career. You have complete flexibility, what you research, what you teach on, when you teach. We get sabbaticals. I'm a sabbatical now. I can talk more about it. It makes people very envious. But we really have the capacity to reinvent ourselves all the time within the context of an institution that is, in my case, a business school, which means I'm well taken care of, I'm well compensated, but I've got a lot of autonomy. So it turned out to be a great choice and a great choice for me. I was always interested in psychology in high school. I think it had to do with the fact that one of my mother's best friends immigrated from Cuba and went into psychology studies, and she sort of had me take some of the psychological tests that, you know, she had to have some guinea pigs to do these things. I found it very intriguing. But as I learned a little bit more about it, I remember I visited a mental hospital and I thought, I'm not sure I want to do clinical psychology. And I learned that there was something called organizational psychology that dealt with the workplace. And I thought that that would be a good marriage of my interest in psychology and my interest in doing something in the working world. And so I followed that. It was really intuitive. It was a hunch. I thought I'd like this. At the University of Miami, there weren't many courses on that. There was one person working in that field. And here's where I got, this is my super, I think one of those super turning point moments. The head of the department who did bird experiments, he was an old traditional experimentalist, took me under his wing and said, you need to think about going to graduate school and you need to work with one of our more junior professors who's publishing in the right journals, who's going to teach you about publishing and about writing research articles. And so go work with this person. Don't work with this person who does the field you're interested in. So I'm still going on a hunch. I think I like this field and I didn't have that much exposure to it at University of Miami. But on the other hand, working with this person who was very research focused is what allowed me to get into Yale and then really delve into this field, which happily enough ended up very much interesting me.
You know, you've stayed in the world of academia and scholarship for your entire career, but that's not to say that you haven't come to transition points in your life where you had to
Yeah.
make decisions about where you were going to practice and what you were going to do, or transition points in your path to sort of scholarly leadership. And you're known as the person who has turned the plan first, then act sort of paradigm on its head, and you sort of say, no, no, you got it wrong. You need to act first. You need to experiment, and then you can be a better thinker and a better leader and have a better career transition. I'm wondering if when you came to those points in your life where you were making either a career transition or you were moving up through the academic leadership wherever you happened to be, did you follow your own advice?
Sure, sure. I have lots of points like that. One of them has to do with, I know, a topic you want to talk about, which is authenticity. And my interest in that was very much rooted in my own experience as a junior professor, because, we get hired because colleagues like our research and are expecting us to publish, but we have to teach on a daily basis. And I've told this story many times, but my first few years at Harvard Business School were miserable. I had terrible teaching ratings. My students thought, who is this person? She's never led an organization. It's all theory, theory, theory. What am I supposed to get out of this? And, I was scared of them. They were the same age as me, MBAs. And so it was really tough, and I couldn't figure out how to do it until what one of my colleagues finally said, look, forget all this stuff about the content and the framework. So you got to own this room, and you kind of gonna go in there and take it and, do whatever it takes. Own it. Go, he literally said, when you walk into that room, be a dog and go and mark your territory in each of the four corners and, go up to the troublemakers and put your arms around them and give them little coaching and whisper in their ears and take their snacks and eat them and see what work they've done and just kind of take control, which was the last thing in the world I wanted to do as an introverted academic. But at some point you get desperate and you start doing what doesn't come naturally in the least as a way of at least getting a different result. Because, you keep doing the same thing, you get the same result. And so I started to get a little bit of a different reaction there, and that put me on a path. And that's the whole, act then think. You have an idea in your head, I should be a better listener, or I should be a delegator, or I need to have more presence. But what does it actually mean in terms of what you do? And you always get it wrong at the outset. And if it's stylistic, it doesn't feel authentic because it's not you. It hasn't been. And so in doing it, you start doing it, it comes out awkward. It's like when you start learning a new language, it doesn't come out right, but you hone it and you're more able to own it and to assimilate it and then start learning the nuance of it. What is this really about? What's really involved? And why does it matter? And do I actually want to invest in it? And that's the learning process by which you're not just picking up a new skill, but you're internalizing a new identity. You have become the person who does that, who values it, who prioritizes, as opposed to, I should be a better listener.
Yeah, I want to come back to authenticity because you're quite right. I do want to talk about it, and it's a hot word these days, and you have a different kind of, I think, a very different and very interesting take on it. But since you talked about the act first and then think later approach, I wonder what you would say distinguishes those people who are either making a career transition from one thing to another, or are moving up trying to move up in the leadership ranks of a corporation. What distinguishes the experimenters from the contemplators? It would seem to me that the experimenter needs to have a higher tolerance for risk because experimentation suggests or connotes, in many cases, failure. A lot of experiments don't work. And the last thing you want to do, if you're in a corporate environment, is be a failure or have a failure tagged on to you because
Yeah.
you tried something different. Can you talk to me a little bit about what distinguishes the contemplators who can get stuck? That's me, man. I overthink crap all the time,
Yeah.
versus the people who are willing to take that experimental risk and, as you say, experiment with possible selves.
Yeah, I've got lots to say on that. So, it's a fallacy to think that doing nothing is the safe bet, isn't it? Especially in today's world. And in so many cases, in my case, I was failing already. So, of course, I was afraid of failure. What if I start acting this way and the students reject me or they give me even worse? Of course, you're afraid because you don't know what's going to happen, but I was already failing. And that's part of what I tried to teach people. They're two different cases, and you've pointed out the two different things I've mostly studied. Transitions that are about moving up within the leadership world, within the context or the industry or the sector you're in, and then transitions that are about changing careers, moving to something else. Um, but people always think I just do, it's safe to do what I know how to do. And it's not. It's not safe to because we live very much in a what got you here won't get you there world. And so you keep doing what you always have done. The environment is changing around you. Your boss's expectations are changing. COVID happens, generative AI happens, all of these things. It's really not safe to sit still. And so people often think, well, let me just wait until I've got some bandwidth or I've got a big stretch of time or I'm feeling more comfortable. When in fact, what I'm talking about is small experiments, small steps, small failures. It's almost like a human version of the fast prototyping that entrepreneurs do. We all know the story about people who have this fabulous idea, but they're not going to do anything about it until it's finally tuned, perfect. Then finally trot it out. Somebody else has done it. You trot out smaller versions, you try it on. How do people react? How do you refine it? And it is really the same. In one case with leadership style, really for people moving up, it is how do they transition from being doers and subject matter experts to being people who facilitate the work of others and being strategists and have the capacity to lead change in their organizations. And those are skill sets that do not emerge full blown. And they are skill sets that take practice and that we get wrong at the outset inevitably because they have to be practiced and they have to be melded with who you are. And so the only way to learn these things, this is learning that's not corporate finance or accounting rules. This is learning about how do I show up? How do I motivate? How do I inspire? And it's never going to come out full blown. I'll talk more about the career change, which is a little bit different. Um, but that's the essence of it, and it's actually not as radical as that. A lot of social psychology has shown that that's how we learn. That, that's how we make progress. That's so.
So I'm in the career transition um, sort of mode here that we're talking about making experiments. I was in a similar sort of mid-career change program a couple of years ago called Halftime, and they described something that I think you were just describing using the words low-cost probes. Make
Low-cost
small
probes.
little efforts to experiment and see what it is you can become as a part of this. To do that in a career change mode, do you have to have a financial cushion? Is it impossible to do if you don't have some resources standing behind you? And what is the risk that you're going to blow it all up and end up with something that doesn't work? And you go, oh my goodness, why in the world did I try that?
So I never suggest leaping without a net. Some people do like to do it. It's good to have financial resources, whether held by you or, people whose partner is willing to hold the front while you experiment. That helps a lot too. But those are not the only cushions. Cushions are also how clear you are about what you want, what kind of relationships you have to help you. I've seen people with a lot of money very, very stuck because what they lack for is something meaningful to do. And I've seen people with very few resources be able to experiment over time. Maybe it takes more planning. I've seen lots of people plan their exits way in advance, saving money, taking classes on the side, building up skills. I'll never forget this one guy. In the study that I did for working identity, he was a consultant And he'd done that for a while, and he really wasn't happy doing consulting. And his big fantasy, he wanted to be a history book writer. His passion was history, and the kind of the alter ego was writer of history books. And we were talking, and I was like, oh, so what have you read recently? You know, what history book have you liked? Turned out he hadn't read a history book in years. Now, that's very telling. If you don't even have the time to read a book, that means you're not serious. I had a student in one of my participant. I had a class here at London Business School 2 years ago for our alumni called Career Change at 50 Plus. And there was a guy who's gone through a lot of transitions. And he said, look, anytime now, I've gone through this a lot of times. Anytime I start to get interested in something, I buy a book. I've made a $15 investment and it takes me a couple hours to read it. If I'm still interested, I'm going to take a MOOC or some kind of online course that has some kind of community attached to it so I can compare notes with other people. But I'm going to take it one step at a time. And it's now there are times in our lives we're ill. We've got somebody in our family ill. We simply do not have the bandwidth for this. And I've seen that as well. Apart from that, all of us can get a little bit more strategic with our time to be able to explore some of these things. Now, when you really don't have the bandwidth, and it's often more emotional rather than specific time. So sometimes it is time. One of the things that I advise is what can you do to take a step back? And is it possible to take an extended vacation? You know, some people are lucky they have employers who allow small sabbaticals. There's something you can do to extract yourself from that situation. And in many cases, there's a colleague of mine who's been working on the science of sabbaticals. And one of the things he finds that I've seen many a time is sometimes you need a break just to rest and restore. You're not going to, and people get disappointed. I took a month and I wasn't able to figure it out, but that's because you're just recouping bandwidth. And they often need a second break or a second step to then start experimenting to do the more transformational stuff. But to come back to your question, there's lots of ways of approaching this without a lot of money in the bank.
You talk very fascinatingly about the sort of experimenting with the possible selves, which is really to me it's I use the metaphor trying on different suits of clothes along the way. You know, you try
Yeah.
this, you try that, and so on and so forth. How do you know? What are the telltales if I'm doing that and I'm trying earnestly? I'm not just contemplating. I'm not just temple rubbing. I'm actually taking steps to try something different. How, whether I'm on a leadership path within an organization or whether I'm in a career transition mode, how do I know when the possible self is worth pursuing and when it should be a hard pass?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And people ask that all the time, and it's not easy to give a straightforward question to it. Now, sometimes you just very clearly feel this is energizing and this is engaging. Okay, sometimes. And then you have to then start figuring out, can I make a living at it, or the other aspects. But sometimes it's very visceral, and you do have to learn to listen to your gut, because sometimes the dissonance comes from the fact that you've gone into something you've always dreamed of doing, and in fact it's not engaging. That happens a lot.
Hmm.
And so how long do you go at it in order to be able to come to that conclusion? Because it's really giving up a dream. I've seen that happen a lot, a lot, a lot. People say, oh, I'd love to be a full-time writer. They take time off to work on a book, and they say, I'd rather let me back to my team and my collaborators. I don't like this. So, so there's a lot in your gut. Do I like it? Do I not like it? Now, from there, these are often weak signals. And it's really helpful. And there's a big part of this that has to do with your network and who you're talking to. because it's a process of making sense. These are new experiences. What am I experiencing? What's going on? Why don't I like it? Or why do I like it? And where is this leading? And so it really helps a lot to talk to people who are in that field or who have gone through that kind of transition. That's why, in our courses, people are so thirsty for the peer benchmarking, just to kind of understand, oh yeah, me too. Because in these things, it is tough. And just because it's tough doesn't mean it's not the right thing. So, there's a lot of conversation in the leadership world. It helps a lot to have mentors and supervisors who are willing to talk that through because they've gone through that transition. In the leadership world, oftentimes, some people are naturals at the people stuff and the big picture stuff, but for a lot of people, it's hard. And they don't know, is it just that I'm really shitty at it right now? Or, is it a lack of experience, or is it really that I'm not meant to do this? And that's why it's really helpful to have conversations with people who can help you interpret the signs and pull out learning and to the extent that you can also have a little bit of compare and contrast experience. I tried that here and I tried that there, seemed to work better here. Why is that? Those things help a lot. And it's a completely different mindset. And part of what makes it so hard is that it's so self-driven. It's
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
self-driven. You're not getting the formal feedback and you're not getting the grade and you're not getting all the signposts. You have to go find the mentor and the people to talk it through with and it puzzle through what is this? But if you,
I'm going to
yeah.
go out of order, which is really what I love to do most, because you brought something up that again I find sort of counterintuitive, but I think very helpful, and that has to do with your network. And your network is very, very important, whether you're making a career transition or whether you're trying to move up through a large organization and through the leadership ranks. And I think if I'm understanding your writing correctly, you believe that to rely on one's comfortable old network of intimates, of mentors who taught you from your university days or maybe early in your career is not sufficient in many cases. You need to expand your network and be really assiduous about doing so and not merely stick with, if you're in a corporation, corporations are often very siloed. And so you might not, your old network that caused you to get ahead in marketing may not be of use to you as you try and expand your portfolio and move into IT work and sales and the CFO, or if you're making a career transition, the board of directors that was helpful to you personally in your earlier life, you may need to expand it and find other people to help you.
That's absolutely true, and that's borne out in a lot of research because the people who have been with us for a very long time, we share a lot in common with them, training, background, experiences. And so there's a little bit of a kind of a group think. We all have our own consensus. We're not questioning things necessarily. And the fact of somebody moving in a different direction could almost be even a betrayal. And so inadvertently, either they don't have the novel information that you need, or inadvertently they hold you back because they just don't even see you in that capacity. In the working identity study of career change, nearly 100% of the people that I followed had somebody close to the ones who were making voluntary changes, had somebody close to them who said, "You must be out of your mind. That's a great job. That's a great job.
Why
What
are
are
you
you
leaving it?
doing?
Yeah.
Hang on another couple years. What's wrong with you?" Um, and when that's what you get, that it's very hard to, yeah, it's just very hard to really see the possibilities and to have the courage to go beyond. Whereas when you talk to people who have done it or who didn't grow up with you, they're like, "Oh yeah, that's a really promising area. Why not? Check it out." They're completely different reactions, and we underestimate how much our network kind of keeps us to who we've always been.
which is kind of what I think you believe the current buzzword authenticity can do. That authenticity can become a trap because you feel like to act differently, to act like a leader, to experiment with new behaviors is to be untrue to yourself. But
Yeah.
in truth, remaining, quote, authentic can be a bit of a trap.
Yeah. So, this is the problem with every business buzzword, right? So we've got this notion of authenticity, and then it skyrockets, and everything is authentic pizza and authentic this and authentic that. And many people have come to define it in lay terms as being as I always have been. And anything that takes you outside your comfort zone makes you feel that's not me. That's not me. And it becomes what I saw is it becomes a defense against learning because in the people that I studied trying to step up to bigger leadership roles, there's not just what you know, but how you come across, how you motivate, how you inspire. And when you're not used to doing that, and particularly using your personal charisma, your personal idiosyncrasies, but you've been mostly managing on the basis of numbers, facts, and figures, it feels very fake. It feels very fake. And so people just say, well, that's not me. Even to the point of dressing a certain way or, whatever. And if you peg that to your sense of authentic self, you essentially protect yourself from having the diversity of experiences that allow you to learn, oh yeah, this works better, this doesn't, and that allow you again to take steps towards something that could ultimately be both you and different and more effective. But I just always ask, can we define this, please, in a way that doesn't condemn you to being as you always have been? Because that's not helpful.
Is the authenticity trap in this context of an organization, is it different for men and women?
It's not different. I've seen it play out exactly the same way, but I've seen it play out a lot more often and more viscerally for women and for numerical minorities because they have fewer role models and because the way they're showing up is less likely to be seen as credible off the bat. And so it's a combination of things. You come to these inflection points where something different is expected of you and you basically interpret that as now I have to choose between being successful and being myself. Um, and you're in a context in which you are threatened. Am I going to be successful? Am I going to make it? Are there people like me here? And I would say in most corporate contexts, women will experience more of that identity threat for all, the reasons we've seen in research. You're more likely, what I saw was that you're more likely to react with the most conservative, cautious version of yourself. You don't, you're
Mhm.
under threat, you're going to be conservative, right?
Mhm.
Instead of saying, I'm going to kick this out of the ballpark, you're saying, I'm not going to screw this up. I'm going to lay low. And then that gets interpreted, for women in the stereotypic way of lack of assertiveness or lack of confidence. And it feeds a cycle. And all of a sudden, oh, she's really smart, but just not bold, stuff like that.
Mhm.
And so I saw it play out more vividly, or more often, shall we say, but it plays out for men as well, particularly men who are counter-normative, maybe who are more introverted, more soft-spoken, more shy. When you're counter-normative to the leadership model, and then of course, if just numerically you look different, it's gonna feel stronger. There's been lots of research on African Americans, the extent to which they feel the need to conform, um, to put on these facades of conformity, which creates real conflicts. And how do I be me? And how do I also fit in? And either way you go seems like a massive compromise. So it's harder.
I think it's interesting. I guess I've read and seen in my own experience the assertive female executive is often perceived in a different way than the equally assertive male executive.
Sure. Yeah, we
Yeah.
still have that.
Yeah, we certainly do still have that. I'm curious, for those people who are wrestling with that question of authenticity, whether they are in a career transition or more likely moving through leadership ranks, and they may have been known for a particular manner and style and consistency and set of values. Uh, how do you retain those virtues while you are experimenting with different roles that cause or that lead to different leadership behaviors? How do you navigate that so that the people who are working with you on your team or working under you don't go, well, she's being really phony. This is not
Yeah,
who she is. I don't she's
yeah.
putting on this shit for show to impress
This
the
comes
board
up
or whatever.
This comes up all the time, and I'll tell you where it plays out the most these days when it comes to leadership, and it's around the coaching leadership style, which has become quite popular. The coaching style meaning leading with questions, and rather than, just tell people what to do, ask them, involve them, and people they've been trained in it. They've been told this is important as a way of empowering others, but also as a way of learning things. And sometimes they've even experienced it powerfully when they've been coached themselves, but they just can't make themselves do it because it feels so fake. Wait, is this about active listening? Should I just go like, or
Yeah.
but or they ask a couple questions and then obviously the answers that come back are not what they were expecting. So at some point they're like, no, this is it. So they feel like a fake. They feel like a fake. And so what are ways of doing that? Well, you take classes. It's an investment. It doesn't come like this. You tell your people, hey, I'm experimenting with this. It's not like I'm going to leave behind my old approach, but I need a toolkit. And I can't have a toolkit if I only have one tool. So I've got to develop some of the other tools. So, yeah, I might get carried away, let me know, but I'm going to try to do this. Getting mentored, having people see you, or trying it out in a different context. Maybe you're on a board in your community and you're gonna hone that a little bit, maybe at home, who knows? But there's lots of ways of doing that. And but the upshot is it takes a long time.
I'm curious, when I started my career, maybe because I was naive or not informed, and probably true, uh, I don't believe I had ever heard of something called a leadership coach or a career transition coach. Are you a believer? Do coaches work? And if they do, or if they can, how can an individual work best with a coach to get the kind of results that they want or seek?
Yeah, that's a big question because there's all different kinds of coaches in all different kind of contexts, and sometimes the coach is hired by you, and sometimes the coach is hired by your company in the hopes of improving you. So they're very different. They're very different situations, and the quality of the coach is going to matter as well. But this is kind of down to basic motivation theory. You've got to want to change in some way. And, what I have seen is that often people have a fairly half-hearted approach to it. Like, I got to do something, or I know I should be, and it's only when people come to see that their own behavior is getting in the way of something that they really care about, that they want to achieve, that then they start to become able to engage help in a productive way because it's a two-way relationship. That coach is not going to put it on you. You've got to work together in order to figure out what is it you're trying to do and then hone it. So it can work very well. There's so many coaches nowadays. There's a whole range of approaches
Yeah.
and levels of expertise. So you've got to also shop around and find the right person. But it can be incredibly helpful, Tyler, because people are really lonely in what they're doing.
Mhm.
Workplaces have gotten very cutthroat. They're not the old, I remember when I was growing up in my career, senior people would come by the office, sit down, how's it going, have a coffee. Yeah, there's not so much of that. You're lucky if you actually see the person in person. And people are afraid of kind of voicing their concerns because layoffs are rampant. So people are quite lonely, and it very much helps to have somebody external who's in your corner, which who
Hmm.
you could say, and and it's a lot of times it's just very block and tackle. Like tomorrow I've got this meeting, and how am I going to manage this? And that outside perspective, sometimes just listening to yourself plan it through helps enormously.
I want to save some time for questions from the people who are part of this webcast, but I've got several more that I want to get through. So we'll go to a kind of lightning round. For someone who feels stuck, either in leadership at a company or in a life transition, what's the best first move?
Do something, call up somebody you used to work with who you haven't seen, or email who you haven't seen in 4 or 5 years. If look, if you know what you're interested in, take a course or try to get in on something related to it. If you don't know, do something that creates some distance from the environment you're in, either through a relationship or through an activity. Sign up for some volunteer activity, do something with your professional association. It gets you in contact with other people and other ways of thinking and other possibilities, and you start to see those very quickly.
One of the things that rings in my head, and if I'm going to walk away from my conversation with you, it'll be this. You need to act like a leader before you really become one, before you feel like one. What is one step that someone listening here today could take over the next week to start to think and act more like a leader?
That one's not so simple. You're going to have to think back to what feedback have you gotten? Where do you think you're kind of not cutting it? Sometimes it's around communication, sometimes it's around listening, sometimes it's around giving feedback, sometimes it's being able to see a bit, more of the big picture strategically. So you got to pick one of those, and what's an activity that could get me practicing that right away. It's sorry, I don't have a simple
Yeah.
one shot
No,
on
no,
that.
no, no. These are not simple. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not one
Um,
size fits all. It's not off the rack kind of stuff. One of the
say
things,
say 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 you want to be a more of a strategist, big picture thinker. Call up two people that you know who work in your industry but elsewhere in other companies, and talk to them about, what's happening strategically at your company, or go listen to a senior person talk about it and see what you learn and kind of follow that thread.
one of the themes in your work, and these are two phrases that are very important. One is outsight, and the other is insight. Would you give us the 1 minute, the elevator story of outsight versus insight? And maybe if you can think of one, lend us an example from your life where an outsight caused you to reorient, do something different, grow.
Yeah, it's simple and hokey. Inside is reflective learning on the past, and outside is experiential learning, trying out stuff you've not done before, basically doing new things with new and different people. That's all it is. And in terms of me, I already gave you the example of my teaching style where I had to really kind of go out on a limb in terms of what didn't come naturally. Another one is, and this is my privilege as an academic, but each time that I've needed to consider a move, I've taken a sabbatical to go and visit that place. When I left Harvard, I didn't leave it in one clean swoop. I took a sabbatical at INSEAD because I had, I was interested in being there. I thought it would expand my mind. Maybe I had an intuition I might like to stay, but I had the benefit of trying it out for a year and a half before I had to cut the cord, and I wouldn't have been able to otherwise. And I don't advocate leaping without a net. So once you're doing what your future self might be doing, you can evaluate it because you're doing it already.
Yeah. You have to get comfortable with the discomfort of trying new things, don't you?
You do.
I
You
mean,
do, but it'll get foisted on you anyhow. So either you choose it or it's gonna come to you in the world in which we live.
can you think of an example, as you've observed business leaders and civic leaders all around the world, of someone who experimented their way to becoming a better leader?
Yeah, I've got one example that springs immediately to mind. It was one of the number two people at Microsoft under Satya Nadella when they first started the big transformation at Microsoft, and he was a
Hmm.
very, I wouldn't say command and control, but he was a very much of a pace setter leader, very much by the numbers, kind of detail oriented, not a micromanager, but old style. And he saw the writing on the wall, and that just this was not going to work in an era in which people had a lot more autonomy out on the field and had to be able to come to their own conclusions. So he invested personally in a coaching course for himself to be able to lead in a more non-directive way as one way of doing things. And as he got better at it, he started coaching his own people in it, and then he kind of put in training for this in the organization. But it was a huge transformation for him because that was just not what he was good at. That was not what he was
Hmm.
known for. People were kind of like, "What, really?"
Yeah.
So that's one example that comes to mind, and he's been a great role model for this because one of the things that he's talked a lot about in more recent times for people who are interested in like how do I get more agile in this world of AI, even if I'm not a technical expert, and he'll talk about all the different ways in which he plays with it in his personal life, in his professional life,
Hmm.
just using it in different, even very basic ways as a way of learning and advancing. And so that's an example.
It seems to me that there are sort of, I can think of at least two mega trends that are going to affect leadership development, career transition over the next quarter century. One is longevity. Not only are we living longer, but our careers are lasting longer, and we want to stay active in careers generally longer than we had in the past.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear you talk about that and the effect, if any, that you see artificial intelligence exerting in the world of leadership development, career transition. So those two, longevity on the one hand, artificial
Yeah.
intelligence on the other, and then I'll wrap with one, and we'll go to Seth for some questions.
Okay. All right. With longevity, and I'm working on a new book that has to do with it. It's pretty clear to me that we've gotten a big gift, which is extra years, and really kind of extra years in our late career years when we're energetic and active and so on. But to be able to cash in on that gift, we have to get a lot better at making transitions, which are still very hard for people. And transitions are hard. And I know you wanted to talk about this because they always imply loss. Even when you're leaving
Hmm.
something you don't want to do, it's a loss of a self you invested in. They imply loss. And the other reason why they're hard is they are particularly later in our careers, from mid-career onwards, they're very what I call under-institutionalized. That is, we do not have the steps given to us. We don't have the recruiters. We don't have the senior people telling us you've got to meet this criteria. We don't have the specific educational program, all the things, the apprenticeship, all the things that help you get from law student to law firm partner, for example. That doesn't exist. How do I go from being, I don't know, an academic to a baker? It's
Hmm.
very much do it yourself. You've got to figure out the steps. You know how long it's going to take. You're not doing it with other people. And so all of that creates a lot of choice, but a lot of ambiguity, and that also makes it hard. So the thing with longevity is we're going to make more transitions. Nobody's going to work at the same job from age 20 to age 70. And back to the AI, the biggest thing that AI is going to do, it's already doing it, is reorganizing organizations, how organizations are structured, what jobs are done, who does what jobs are done with technology. And so that also is creating a lot of turbulence and a lot of disruption in the occupations and the organizations within which people build their careers. So we've got to be more agile. Now, AI and leadership development, I don't know. I think AI is a great coach. I use it all the time on everything. How do I deal with this colleague? How do I deal with my son? I use it for everything. And it's a tool. It's not the only tool, but it's very good. And I'm sure we'll use it for some of the more reflective aspects of leadership development, but there's no substitute for then going out and doing it and see how it works.
Final question before I turn it back to Seth, and I could talk to you all afternoon. I've really enjoyed this, and thank you for your time today. Can you think of very quickly three leaders whom you particularly admire or who are sort of paradigmatic leaders in the sense that they have used outside as opposed to inside or a mixture of the two?
Tyler, I'm going to disappoint you maybe. I never answer this question
Hmm.
because I've seen today's role model be tomorrow's pariah too many times, and
True.
I'm just not close enough to it. I think we all need to look for our own heroes and role models, and so I don't have a good answer to that.
That's quite fair. Let me turn it back to Seth. Herminia, thank you again. I know I'll get to say goodbye before we go, but let me turn it back to Seth because I'm sure coming out of this conversation, there are lots of good questions. Seth?
There are a lot of good questions. And so I'm going to start with one from Celeste. She asked, do you believe it is more difficult to change careers in the US, given the job market, versus Europe? Can you speak at all about the differences across the continents?
Yeah. So job market is pretty bad everywhere. Let's just start with that. It is pretty bad everywhere. The one big difference I see is in countries where healthcare and pensions are tied to your employer, and countries in which healthcare and pensions are not. In countries in which healthcare and pensions are not, people feel more freedom to do freelance things that allow them to build up skills and contacts and move into different areas. Whereas in countries like the US, when everything is pegged to the employer, people are more apt to hang on as best they can because what you're giving up is more.
There's another question here about your book, Act Like a Leader. This person writes that they loved your book, Working Identity, and use it all the time in coaching, and wondered what different information might they glean from Act Like a Leader.
So the common theme is fast prototype yourself, act your way into a new way of thinking and being. So that's a common theme, but what you're doing is different. And so in Act Like a Leader, I talk about how you have to redefine your job to be less about doing the subject matter expert stuff and more about leading change and setting strategy and adding value in different ways. So it's different. It's also different networks. But the networks theme is there as well. And I also deal a lot more with the issues of authenticity, which come up more around leadership style, whereas that comes up less around career change.
We have a question here from someone who is just retiring from a 40-year career in one field and asks, what tips do you have for figuring out how to find ways to contribute in your next phase, perhaps in a different area or even new identity interests?
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a broken record on this. It is experiment. I'll tell you, there's a hilarious TED Talk, and I've forgotten it's called something like How to Squeeze the Juice Out of Retirement. And the guy says, look, there's four phases to retirement. One is vacation, then depression, ocean, it's then experimentation, and then I
Yeah.
forgot what's the fourth. You finally figure it out. But you have to experiment with what's the mix, courses, volunteer work, until you find a thing that becomes really interesting and engaging.
Well, indeed, we have a leadership and society initiative here all around this idea. And what we often call it is structured experimentation, where, we are expanding horizons and doing all these pieces, but ultimately it's not a science, it's an art. And you're trying to go through all these permutations until you find what
Yeah,
you find so valuable. I was with David Brooks earlier this week, who's a faculty member here, and he said one of the ways to think about it at this stage of life is that it's like falling in love. There are ideas that you have, but you have to kind of, have all these things come together and create magic for you to kind of figure
yeah,
out what's really going to make you sing when it's no longer necessarily needed to accomplish something like that first
yeah.
mountain may be in your career.
Yeah. Also just talk to a couple people who retired a few years before and, ask them what did they do and what did they find. Talking to people always helps.
We have another comment here from Sandra. What advice would you give to a job seeker who left a senior executive level role and trying to get back at that level, which is fewer roles now at that level? So, how do you think about that? And I mean, should people that have held senior roles, should they be open to thinking beyond maybe that level of seniority as the next step if it's not absolutely necessary for, their financial needs, for example?
Right. So that's a complicated one. What I always advise is whenever you're in a job search situation, diversify.
Yeah.
Diversify, have at least a couple pathways. It is increasingly harder to make your way back to senior executive role because there's fewer of them, and every organization is in streamlining mode. So fine, keep looking, but start another avenue. What else might that be? Now, going more junior doesn't always work because organizations get suspicious and they're like, well, why would you want that junior role? You're going to be bored. So that's not always the way. Sometimes it is thinking about something different.
All right, so Ashley is doubling down on Tyler's last question, but in a new way, Herminia. So we'll see if you'll answer this one. She writes, that outside of big name people that we would be able to recognize, is there anyone in your life who you know well who has shaped your worldview and how?
Yeah. I'm
Okay,
gonna pass on that.
you'll pass on that too.
There's lots of people. Yeah.
Yeah. Let us close with you, Herminia. I'm curious if you could just talk a little bit about, how the process of writing these books has shaped you and how you see your next chapter. So, as you think about your bonus years, for example, what is that going to look like for you, given that
Yeah.
you've counseled so many others on this topic?
Yeah. So, there's this thing about how we all write autobiographically in some way. And so I'm one of those writers who knows what she's written, what she wants to write when she's written it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
My thoughts clarify in the writing. And I do like that process a lot. And I don't necessarily always know where it's going. I have an evolving outline that changes all the time. So my bonus years, yeah, there. I'm right in there. Um, I am going to be co-directing a center. It's not all approved or all settled yet, but we're going to be launching a center for work on work and longevity here at the London Business School, and I'm going to be involved in that. And I hope that'll be an interesting next thing. I've just gotten a new elective approved on identity and transition and leadership careers, so I'm going to be teaching that in 2027, and I'm going to be doing a lot of book launching
But
in
is there
next
a
year.
new identity that you're thinking of as well, embracing, or experiments that you're running kind of beyond that professionally?
Maybe working a little bit less.
Yeah,
Maybe working a little bit less. Um, but I will still be writing and teaching and
yeah,
speaking and working with students. I like that. Maybe, maybe with the years a bit less. I like traveling. I have many hobbies, and I hope to find more and more time for those things. But it's not a re-envisioning of it. I've always now for the last 20 years I've done a lot of speaking and working with companies, so I'll continue to do that. I had trained as a coach in my last sabbatical, and I thought I'd do more of it, but it's not become, I thought I'd do more of it, and I haven't. Who knows?
yeah.
Maybe I'll pick it back up. But what I really enjoy most is the writing and the teaching, and so I'm going to keep doing that.
Well, I mean, this has been a wonderful conversation. I'll let Tyler close us out, but thank you for visiting with us virtually, sharing your life and career lessons, and giving us insight into how we can live really meaningful and sometimes reinventive lives. And Tyler, last word.
No, I really appreciate it. I got to maybe a third of the questions because the conversation just became its own sort of organic one, and I hope you enjoyed it
I
Herminia,
did very
as
much.
much as I did. And I would say this, having been a writer for the earliest part of my career, if you're spending a lot of time writing, you're working hard because people think writing is, oh, I'll just go write a book. I'll just go write it. It is hard, hard, hard work, physical work, right?
Well, there's a big lag in between each of the books that I've written, and that's why it
That's
is
why.
it's very
It's
hard work.
it
Um,
really is. Anyhow, thank you so much for your insight and for your time and for your participation. And people, I don't think understand how much goes behind the scenes, but it's really been nice getting to know you and your team. And I hope I get to come take one of your classes sometimes. Sometime. Maybe I'll take a sabbatical and come over.
I like that.
Thank you
And
so much.
likewise. Okay.
Fantastic.
And likewise. Thank you, Tyler. Thank you,
Thank you,
Seth. It's been a
Herminia.
Thank
real
you, Herminia.
privilege to be with you.
Have a
Bye-bye.
great
Likewise.
day.
Seth,
Bye.
thank you. And thank you all for watching.